I am Anna Seewald, and this is Authentic Parenting, a podcast about growing ourselves while raising our children. I'm a psychologist, educator, and parent coach. And on this podcast, we explore how you can connect to your authentic self, practice radical self-care, and raise emotionally healthy children. Let's break the cycle of generational trauma for a more peaceful, kind, and compassionate world. Today, are kids okay these days?
Dr. Ross Greene, clinical psychologist, author of books like The Explosive Child and Lost at School and Raising Human Beings, and the forthcoming The Kids Who Aren't Okay, The Urgent Case for Reimagining Support, Hope, and Belonging in Schools. It's a very good read for parents as well. It all applies. Probably most importantly, these days, I am the founder of the nonprofit Lives in the Balance, which advocates on behalf of kids with concerning behavior and their caregivers and provides all kinds of free resources on the model I originated called Collaborative and Proactive Solutions.
In today's conversation, I am joined by Dr. Ross Greene. He's a returning guest, and his previous episode is one of the most downloaded and played episodes of the podcast. Dr. Greene is the author of The Explosive Child, a classic book, and he has a new book called The Kids Who Aren't Okay. Are the kids okay these days? Are we truly seeing increased rates of anxiety, depression, and suicidality? Or are we just paying more attention? And is social media really to blame? Or is that too simple? How about the COVID-19 pandemic? In this episode, we talk about what he calls developmental variability, the simple but profound truth that kids develop differently, and why meeting children where they are is not lowering expectations, but redefining them wisely. We explore whether it's truly harder to be a kid today, what risk factors are shaping this generation, and why focusing on behavior misses the deeper distress underneath. This is an important conversation. I am honored to have Dr. Greene back on the podcast. I have tremendous respect for his work. This conversation will challenge you, and I hope leave you feeling grounded and, most importantly, hopeful. Please enjoy, and thank you for listening. Well, welcome to the podcast, Dr. Greene.
Thank you for having me on again.
Your nonprofit, by the way, that website is an excellent resource. I will promote it, and I myself used it multiple times. You're doing an incredible advocacy work, and I think everyone should know about it. So are you ready to begin with our rapid fire questions?
Let's do it. This sounds like fun.
Okay, here's question number 1. Are kids okay these days?
Yes and no. Am I allowed to say yes and no?
Yes, you can. Yes. Number 2, does social media affect their mental health?
Yes and no.
Are kids more stressed than their parents?
No, their parents are more stressed than the kids.
Did the COVID-19 pandemic make things worse?
Yes.
Do we really see an increased rates of depression, anxiety, and suicidality in kids these days?
Yes.
Is it possible to spot mental health struggles in kids before they become severe?
Yes.
Are more kids being diagnosed as neurodivergent today than in the past?
Yes.
Have schools been focusing on kids' behavior instead of the problems causing the behavior?
Oh my goodness, yes.
Is our education system failing to account for how differently kids develop and cope?
Despite the best efforts of a lot of educators, the answer to that question is yes.
And I have 2 last questions. Are we expecting kids to adapt to school instead of adapting schools to kids.
In many places, we are still expecting the former when we should be expecting the latter.
And the last one is reaching to crisis too late to actually help children.
Oh my goodness. Yes.
And I have to say, that's one of the best concepts of your work, best ideas. And I think it's revolutionary. Not, I've never heard anyone talk about that. So, what I would like to ask you to do in the beginning, because your approach is, I'm sure my listeners are familiar with you and your approach. I have a colleague who I do episodes with, Dr. Laura Freud, and she's a big proponent of your work, and I think she's trained in your work. So my listeners know, I'm assuming, who you are and what you do. But I think it would be still wise to define some terms and maybe give a little bit of overview what your work is about, and then we'll dive into the new book. Is that fair?
That's fabulous. I would say that there are a few distinguishing features of the work, and that in some people's minds are what make it revolutionary. First of all, we don't have caregivers focused on a kid's concerning behavior. Instead, we have them focused on the problems that are causing that behavior. That is a very big deal because if we're focused on a kid's concerning behavior, we're going to be focused on trying to modify that behavior. But if we view concerning behavior as simply a frustration response, and that is exactly how we should view it, then the kid is frustrated about something, and that is what we should be focused on. And that something tends to be an expectation that the kid is having difficulty meeting, or what we call an unsolved problem. Unsolved problems happen before the concerning behaviors that tell us that the kid is having difficulty meeting the expectation. So by focusing on the kid's concerning behavior, we tend to be late. By the time the kid is exhibiting concerning behavior, we're late. We are in crisis management mode. And as you noted, a lot of what we teach educators and parents to do is what to do in response to a kid's behavior, what to do when it's already late. That is not best practice for kids. That is not best practice for their caregivers. So, big thing number one, let's focus on problems and solving them rather than behaviors and modifying them. Let's be early, not late. Those unsolved problems are highly predictable and can be identified proactively. Things like at home, this could be things like difficulty brushing teeth before going to bed at night, difficulty turning off the Xbox to come in for dinner. Oh, there's hundreds of possibilities for unsolved problems at home. There's also hundreds of possibilities for unsolved problems at school. Difficulty completing the double-digit division problems on the worksheet in math. Difficulty coming back into the classroom after recess. I could take up the whole program and not even begin to cover all the expectations kids sometimes have difficulty meeting at school and at home that can cause frustration responses, which we have been busy trying to modify through rewards and punishments. So here's something that's really important for people to know. Rewards and punishments aren't problem-solving strategies. You're not going to solve a single problem through consequences. Just not what consequences do. And then I guess the other big thing about the model is what the problem solving is about. It's collaborative, meaning the kid is involved. The kid is integral, indispensable to the problem solving process, and it's proactive. You don't want to be solving problems with a kid once they're already in the thick of having difficulty meeting the expectation, because those unsolved problems are predictable. They can be identified proactively. They can be solved proactively. I would say that those are the biggest things that get people's attention about this model.
Yeah, definitely. I think you're very well known for your phrase, kids will do better if they can.
Kids do well if they can, yes.
If they can. Yeah, I think that's a very popular catchphrase of yours.
By the way, it's an important catchphrase
Yes, it is.
because for a very long time, the catchphrase has been kids do well if they wanna.
Yep.
which makes it seem like if a kid isn't doing well, isn't meeting our expectations, is because they don't want to meet our expectations. That is still way too popular in way too many places. Kids do all if they can says this kid actually would very much prefer to be doing well. Motivation is not what's getting in their way. What's getting in their way is they're having difficulty meeting certain expectations. And a lot of them are struggling with the skills, critical word, that are involved in handling those frustrations adaptively.
Yeah, but I mean, if you think about the society, like the jails, the prisons, this is how we solve problems, even with adults. I guess once we change the school systems or how we raise and educate children, maybe it will trickle down to societal levels.
Well, we've already implemented the model in prisons.
Hmm.
We have seen dramatic reductions in recidivism, in staff and kid injuries, in the use of solitary confinement and restraint. So we're not waiting to trickle down. And I think that I wouldn't call what we're doing in most prisons problem solving. I would call it behavior management, and just locking people up is not a problem solving strategy.
Hey, I want to invite you to a new adventure. In a world of quick texts and emojis, so much remains unsaid and unprocessed. But when we sit down and write a letter, it helps the thoughts and feelings we've been carrying finally have a voice. Letters have been part of my life for as long as I can remember. I have written many. I use them in my work, and I know how powerful they can be for healing, whether you send them or not. That's why I created a year of letters on Substack. Each week, I share a gentle prompt inviting you to write a letter to yourself, to someone from your past, to an emotion, or to a part of your life that wants attention. We also offer occasional guest sessions and community reflections. You can join anytime, write at your own pace, and leave whenever you need. Join me on Substack, A Year of Letters with Anna Seawald. I would love to write alongside you. What I like about your work is you also say that the good parenting, good teaching is meeting children where they are at. I would love for you to speak about that.
I love speaking about that.
Yes.
Here's a diagnosis that applies to every human being: developmental variability. Every existing psychiatric diagnosis is a reflection of developmental variability. We all are developmentally variable, which is a very fancy way of saying we're all different. In a lot of places, and schools have been under pressure to do this since we started the high stakes testing thing, which was the worst idea to come down the pike since ever. We started trying to get every kid over the same bar by the end of the school year. Horrendous. Not meeting every kid where they're at. The only way we did it is we tried to take every kid and get them over the bar by the end of the school year, right? No matter where they were at. Well, here's the interesting thing. Some kids aren't going to get over that bar yet. Doesn't mean they never will, just means they're not getting over that bar yet. If we don't meet them where they're at, they're going to flounder, because that's never worked. It never works to not meet kids where they're at. It works to meet kids where they're at and watch them start to develop and watch them start to kick in. Meeting every kid where they're at means every kid is different. We're not comparing this kid to any other kid. While standards are a wonderful thing, each kid needs to be their own reference point. And boy, would that make, and by the way, that's consistent with other ideas in education, like differentiated instruction and personalized learning. This is not like wild. So meeting every kid where they're at is the definition of good parenting and good teaching. It's not comparing your kid to somebody else. It's not comparing this student to the other 28 in their classroom. It's figuring out where this kid is at and meeting them there. That's the best way to help kids grow.
Do you think the schools have enough resources to execute that?
I really do. I think that the reason schools feel stretched for resources is because they're not doing that. And they're spending a lot of time dealing with the concerning behaviors, the frustration responses that occur when we're not meeting kids where they're at.
You know what I was wondering? Is there a school, maybe in your state, in your hometown, or somewhere else that has adopted your approach fully and like a model school?
Lots of them,
Lots of them?
lots of them.
Can you say more of what you see, how this happened, perhaps?
Well, they got trained,
Hmm.
and you don't have to get trained by my nonprofit Lives in the Balance. Lots of schools do a book study using Lost at School, and the main ingredients are commitment and intentionality. But if a school recognizes that what they're doing now isn't working very well, all those punitive, exclusionary, harmful disciplinary procedures aren't helping anybody and aren't best practices for anybody, and truly commits to turning things around, including their structures and their practices, you will end up with schools that are no longer referring kids to the office for discipline, no longer giving detentions or suspensions or expulsions, no longer restraining and secluding kids, no longer using corporal punishment, because they now recognize, number one, that's not what these kids need. That's not where the action's at. We're probably doing more harm than good, and we could be doing something differently. Now, here's what's interesting. Somehow we put behavior in a different category than every other thing that goes on in a school, right? How we teach reading has gone through many evolutions over time. How we teach a lot of things has gone through many evolutions over time. Unfortunately, at many schools, we are still stuck in the dark ages when it comes to how we deal with concerning behavior and what concerning behavior means.
Yeah, I'm always struck by. I talk to early childhood educators at conferences nationwide, and I don't use your language, but I have my own proponent of the same philosophy, same approach, and I'm always struck how as if like they're discovering it for the first time when you share ideas like this. It's like they're so stuck in their old ways. They can't see beyond that. It's so hard to illuminate them. But when they are, they share notes are like, wow, this is mind blowing. This is life changing. I'm going to adopt this. I'm going to do this. Well, I guess it's a business, right? Whatever prevailing model is and why they are perpetuating this forward. I don't know the details of it.
It's a training issue.
Is it a
Uh,
training issue?
Totally. We're not, when we are training parents on how to parent,
Hmm.
in many cases, we're still teaching them about rewarding and punishing. I remember distinctly when my daughter was a year and a half, our visit to the pediatrician, and she asked us if my daughter had her first time out yet.
Oh, wow.
And I said, why? She didn't know me or my work. I said, why would she get a timeout? And the pediatrician said, just good parenting. That's a training
Oh,
issue,
wow.
right? That's a training issue for the pediatrician.
Yep.
That's a training issue for parents. Educators receive very little training in how to manage a classroom, and the little training that they do is often the wrong training. As you were saying what you were saying, I was thinking, this shouldn't be mind-blowing anymore.
Yeah, but it is, unfortunately.
It is, unfortunately, but mostly that's a training issue. The reason it's mind-blowing for people is because they haven't been exposed to it yet.
But they go to those conferences all the time, and I guess they have the same speakers, the same trainings. I'm surprised how like education should be the forefront of change and innovation, but it's like somehow it's not.
Well, when it comes to behavior,
Yeah.
educators have been indoctrinated in for decades, thanks to tremendous support from the United States Department of Education, quite frankly, isn't supposed to endorse anything, is PIS, Positive Behavior Interventions and Supports, which number one has them focused on behavior. Number two derives from the applied behavior analytic tradition, which is focused on behavior and modifying it. So it doesn't surprise me that a lot of times when people go to conferences, what they come back with is the same old stuff. The reason this shouldn't be mind blowing is because this has been out there for a long time. I find that the biggest impediments are structures. I don't find mindsets that difficult to change. but we have structures in schools that set us up to be late, that set us up to be reactive, that set us up to focus on behavior. Often a functional behavior assessment is what our kids who are struggling the most in schools get. And often, not always, but often, FBAs are focused on behavior. So we got a lot of structures. They can be changed with some intentionality and with some commitment. This is not the impossible dream. It's just that we got to put our minds to it.
Yeah, even when you submit to the conferences, your talk title, I know what's going to be attractive to the educator. I would love to have a different title, the one I believe in, but I craft my title to attract them to my training. I title my talk, Managing Challenging Behaviors in the Classroom. Guess what? Most of the people, my rooms are always filled because that title somehow drives people in. And the first thing I tell them, I'm like, today you're not going to learn about anything about managing challenging behaviors. This is a false title. And they look at me like, what? What are you saying? It's true. It's unfortunately, that's what they want. They just want to know how they can control and manage. And the focus is always on the behavior.
Except for right along with low pay,
Yeah.
students concerning behavior are among the number one things educators are concerned about and among the reasons they leave the profession. So it's no surprise that the room is full. And I love that you start them off by telling them that's not what you're going to focus on. Perfect.
I read that, I think it was in your book or somewhere you said that a lot of educators left the field after the COVID-19 pandemic.
A lot did, like about 600,000.
Wow.
I also said a lot of those positions haven't been filled, so we are short-staffed in a lot of places these days. And educators weren't that happy pre-pandemic, but what we put educators through during the pandemic was nuts. Educators suffered right up along there with parents. It's interesting though, I did one talk during the pandemic, and it was at an educators conference in upstate New York. And I didn't feel like doing my usual talk because people were, it's the pandemic. And I asked them what their biggest worry was. And their biggest worry was that there would be a rush back to normal after the pandemic. Their fears have been realized. But I also asked them if there was anything good about the pandemic. And what they said was, during the pandemic, they were given permission to break rules, to bend over backwards to meet kids where they're at. They thought it was better. That's why they were very worried that there would be a rush back to normal. Normal isn't so great for a lot of kids.
Yeah, well, boy, there was rush back to normal and there was no normal. And I think we're still recovering. It feels like kids were behind. I can see it in my own kid. What has been the bad things that have been cultivated habits like being late to school and things of this nature. There's still persistent problems.
They are. Now, here's the interesting thing. It's tempting to blame COVID. I don't. As you read in chapter 1 of The Kids Who Aren't Okay, there's a lot of things that have made it harder to be a kid these days. And those things were in place well before the pandemic. So I don't blame the pandemic. I just think it's a lot harder to be a kid these days. And while it's true that a lot of those things are things we can't do anything about, some of those things we can do something about. What we especially have to do is make sure that our school culture, school climate is responsive to what's walking in the door. And what's walking in the door are a lot more kids who are a lot more vulnerable than 20 years ago. That's the new normal. We have to meet those kids where they're at.
Yeah. Can you talk about the risk factors? I know there are many, and I list those risk factors in my talk as well, and I add a few more. I think it's important to highlight them. Yes, the pandemic is not the main reason, right? That those issues were there before. It might have exacerbated or highlighted certain things. I really want to talk about the risk factors.
We can't go through all of them. I don't have time, but I'll cover my top
Your
three.
favorites. Yeah, your top three, maybe.
Top three. Number one, school shootings. There's a lot of kids and a lot of educators who are very anxious about being shot at school. If we're wondering why there are higher rates of anxiety and depression in kids, that's a place to look. We often overlook that completely. A lot of kids, Over half of kids are anxious about being shot at school. The statistic is the same for educators, and quite a few of them are extremely anxious about that. Okay, school's supposed to be a safe place. High stakes testing. I already talked about this a little bit, but worst idea to come down the pike in forever, right? Telling educators that their job performance and job security was going to be pegged to how their students do on high stakes tests is not the way to meet every kid where they're at, and not the way to be attuned to the developmental variability that is walking through the door. That's a very good way to put expectations on kids that they can't yet meet, cause frustration responses. Oof. And then the third one is zero tolerance policies, which became popularized after Columbine. This is where we tightened the vice grip even further. We became even more focused on behavior and consequences, even more rigid. The data are in on zero tolerance policies. They made things worse. They did not make schools safer. So here's what's interesting. I work in other countries as well. There are other countries, especially in Scandinavia, that are slowly moving towards zero tolerance policies and using us as an example of what a good idea that is. Whenever I'm over there speaking, I say to them, you got to be kidding me. We don't use us as an example. Don't use us as an example of the benefits of high stakes testing either. Of course, they don't have school shootings in other countries like we do here. Those are my top three. Notice one that didn't make the top three, but you asked me about it earlier. Social media. Let there be no doubt. There's a lot of things in social media that aren't good for kids. About 90% of kids are on social media. Most of them are doing okay. Notwithstanding that, there's a lot of stuff in social media that's not good for kids, right? Somehow a high percentage of them are still doing okay despite that. What the most definitive thing we can say based on research about social media is that it is the kids who are way overusing it whose mental health is most adversely affected. And I'm not saying that social media isn't an issue. I just think that if people think that if they do something about social media, they'll make everything okay, they will miss everything else that's going on. And the list is way longer than the three I mentioned earlier.
Yeah, I agree, but somehow I feel like people do want something to focus on as a problem to solve, like social media, which completely is not the issue. I agree with you. But I'm always surprised that parents and educators want something like that, so that perhaps it's small enough for them to know and understand and fix so that they can get excited about things. I don't know what that is, but the anxious generation, as you are familiar with, I heard your talk about this. It made a big wave, right? Everybody knows about the anxious generation book, Jonathan Haidt. I didn't interview him on purpose on my podcast because I don't want to have this narrow view like you. I understand and know that there are many risk factors and that this is a problem, but maybe not the main causal biggest problem. So I didn't interview him for that reason for my podcast. But nevertheless, I mean, every parent I talk to knows about that book, yet not the same parent knows about your work, which is kind of, right? It's surprising.
I tend to be a bit more measured. I tend to be more nuanced. I do have a background in science. Actually, so does Jonathan Haidt. It helps that I am not super oriented towards selling books. It helps me stay true to my message. It doesn't necessarily help me sell books. I don't want to be book sale oriented. I'd much rather say what I think is true. And those are not the same thing.
I agree with that. And social media, like that, they say it's correlational, it's not causal. And I think one more thing is important to note that it's bidirectional, right? Kids who already have depression and anxiety, they tend to use those devices more. Like my daughter is a very mindful user of social media and devices. I never felt challenged by that, right? And I know many kids, but I also know the opposite, that there are kids I was with my extended family over the holidays, and turns out my 9-year-old niece is using TikTok and she has a phone. And the parents were concerned and they were asking me advice for it. And I said, well, it's too late. If you have given it already, it's like you have to put the guardrails in from the beginning. And the reason they wanted advice was that she had seen how Charlie Kirk got shot TikTok. Imagine a 9-year-old seeing this. And it's like, wow, I can't even wrap my head around this. So, yes, it is an issue. It's a cause for a lot of fights in a lot of households and a lot of concerning behaviors, though, right?
No doubt. But I would say that, yes, it would be better if parents were mindful and intentional about these things ahead of time.
Yeah, not to be late, your concept, right? Yeah.
Right. So your relatives are a little late to the show, but they may not have anticipated their 9-year-old seeing Charlie Kirk getting shot. If the 9-year-old has free reign on the internet, there's a whole bunch of things that they could see and that, a lot of us have sort of been seeing since the Vietnam War came into our living rooms on the evening news every night back in the 1960s, and that shocked a lot of people, right? So there's gruesome things on the internet that can be accessed without being on TikTok. But I would say they now have a problem that needs to be solved. And this, of course, goes to the heart of the CPS model. They've got a few approaches to that. They can decide that it's not a high priority. We call that Plan C. Then they can decide that it is a high priority and solve it unilaterally. That would be Plan A, take away everything. Or they can decide that it's a high priority and instead solve the problem collaboratively in concert with their kid. And of course, what I've been talking about since way before the explosive child was you're going to be a whole lot better off solving it collaboratively. I noticed I'm eager to see what occurs in Australia. Many people are envious of Australia because they banned cell phones in schools.
Unilaterally, like it's a legislative.
Correct. And some states have done the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
And they might have banned some other things. Not, I'm blocking on what they banned. They may have done some things in social media as well, in terms of age limits. And the first thing I saw was kids saying, "How are you going to stop us?" So this is the interesting thing about being unilateral. This is the interesting thing about mandating things. Yes, you can ban cell phones in schools, and that might be a good way to get kids to pay attention more to their schoolwork than to their cell phones, right? Is that going to take care of a lot of things? No, it would take care of that one thing. Did they have to do it unilaterally or could they have done it collaboratively? They could have done it collaboratively, and many schools are. Mandates are hard to enforce. Better to get the kids engaged in solving that problem than just to lay a mandate on them.
The mandates are still like the behavioral approach, right? The top-down approach. But do you think solving it proactively is harder, takes more time than this, authoritarian approach, the top-down? What's the problem? Why can't people like gravitate towards proactive problem solving, collaborative?
Well, they do think that solving a problem collaboratively is going to take more time. It actually takes less because all those problems that are solved unilaterally, most of them aren't solved at all.
Yeah, they are like paused or right. There's threats and fear and
Those solutions tend not to work. They tend not to work for very long. Educators and parents know that.
mhm.
Right? Once again, this is a training issue. What they don't know is how to do it another way, right? But the kids who are struggling the most are the ones who've had the most unilateral interventions.
That's right. Yes.
They are proof that those interventions aren't working. They've had the most detentions, suspensions, expulsions, restraints, seclusions, proof that those interventions are not working. So I view solving problems collaboratively as a major time saver and solving problems unilaterally as a major time suck.
I agree with you. Oh my gosh, when you're saying seclusions and restraint, I work with one client whose kid experienced those throughout the school years, and the school eventually a 10-year-old kid who has ADHD and other things was expelled from school, and no other school in our state would accept that kid. For 9 months, they were trying to find a placement, the parents, for this kid because no kid would accept this kid. And I was advocating with the parents, that this is ridiculous. Like, what is this kid? He just has quote unquote behavioral problems, right? But like, why would no school accept this 10-year-old kid? Why would he be a threat?
He must have had big behaviors. A lot of people slice the pie by how severe a kid's behavior is. I don't. I get it that severe behaviors can be scary and dangerous and disruptive. But the bottom line is this: if you don't know what concerning behavior is, if you're slicing the pie by how severe it is, if you don't know how to move upstream and be proactive with kids so as to prevent the behavior from occurring in the first place, that's going to seem like a scary kid. And I'll repeat myself, that's a training issue, right? The fact that that kid was so scary to people that it took 9 months for them to find a school that felt like they could deal with that kid, that's a pity. That's a life on the way to being lost.
And it's a behavioral school. It's not just a regular school. This is a behavioral school where he has his own room, like a seclusion room. And maybe it's a little different than other places. It's a smaller class size and things like that. But the last report I got from the parent is and you're not going to like this. I didn't like it either. He's testing at grade level already. So that they, train this kid so hard with behavioral things that he's testing. That's the most important thing. Okay. They were working towards testing at the grade level.
I don't mind that he's testing at grade level. I mind, and I don't.
But how did they get there? That's the issue. Yeah. I now know another kid who got expelled from my school district because he was bringing the school testing scores down, the kid in third grade. In third grade.
That tells you what our priorities are, and that we're putting the cart in front of the horse.
So, what are you proposing in this new book? I would love for you to speak about that, the changes that you are proposing.
Well, the book is 12 chapters, so it takes a little while to explain. In the book, anyways, I won't go into detail here. But in chapter 2 of The Kids Who Aren't Okay, I talk about the changes that we can make to do a better job of meeting every kid where they're at and to be more responsive to the fact that we've got a lot of kids walking into our schools these days that are more vulnerable. And we've already talked about most of them, believe it or not. We shouldn't be focused on concerning behavior and modifying it. We should be focused on the problems that are causing that behavior and solving them. We should be relentlessly focused on developmental variability, on meeting every kid where they're at. This is critical and a major shift for many schools. We need to move away from the punitive, exclusionary, disciplinary practices that have done more harm than good. We need to start solving problems with kids collaboratively and proactively. If we were doing those things, and that's not a very long list, it's just that in many schools, that's not what we're doing right now. We would have fewer kids who aren't doing okay, and we would be doing a lot better job of meeting every kid where they're at.
Is formal education necessary, do you think?
To implement this model,
Not necessarily this model, but just in general. Yeah, I agree. This model is important to implement if there are schools. I'm asking you because lately I've been questioning, do we even need formal education or schools per se the way they are at? Do we need to reconstruct perhaps how schools are, or are schools necessary? I'm just asking I guess, a philosophical question.
I think schools are necessary for a society that wants its citizens to be gainfully employed. But we need schools especially to not only be about academics. We need schools to be what they always have been, up until maybe 20 or 30 years ago when we became obsessed with high stakes testing. I've had many educators say to me, and this is them reflecting on the last 20 to 30 years, they've taken all the humanity out of my job by being obsessed with academics, right? That's not what educators have always been. That hasn't made things better. That's left a lot of kids behind. I think we need to give educators, I keep the structure of schools. I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I just want to help schools go back to what they've always been and understand the kids who aren't okay better and know how they can help them better.
Mm.
That feels more doable to me.
Yeah, yeah, that makes more sense. Is there anything you are passionate about sharing that I haven't asked about the new book?
There's a lot of schools that are heading in this direction. Once again, the key ingredients, knowing what direction you want to head in. And I think the book lays out a wonderful template for that. The book, as you saw, also includes stories from educators who've done it. Very helpful. The main things people got to get good at is identifying unsolved problems proactively. We have an instrument that helps them do that. Takes way less time than a functional behavior assessment, and knowing how to solve problems collaboratively and proactively with kids. And recognizing that a kid who's hitting could be telling us 100 different things, and that the most important thing we can do is not focus so much on the hitting, but figure out what the hitting is telling us.
Yeah, it's unfortunately like we spoke about it in the beginning. It's kids can do well if they can. The, like a lot of the mentalities, it assumes that kids are purposefully, maliciously misbehaving. It just assumes that right away, and it's just like, no, that's not what it is. Do you steer clear from phrases like dysregulation, nervous system, stress response? What's your reaction to those terms? They're very popular these days, co-regulation, regulation. How do you react to that?
Dysregulation is a fine term. Um, Mostly dysregulation occurs, though, when a kid is having difficulty meeting an expectation. So dysregulation tends to be late. Therefore, co-regulating tends to be late. I mentioned that in chapter 3 of the book. People are proactively planning to co-regulate, but it kicks in when a kid is already dysregulated. Well, I don't take dysregulation as a given. I think it's the wrong mentality, but I have no problem with the term, right? Stress response is great. I prefer frustration response. I actually prefer distress response. The reason I prefer distress response is because that is a term that we would use with infants.
Hmm.
We say that infants are distressed and they communicate that they're distressed, crying, vomiting. We don't need to go into detail about how infants communicate that they're distressed, but I'll tell you what we do with infants. We try to figure out what they're distressed about. I like viewing concerning behavior for the rest of the kid's life in the same way. Concerning behavior is still a distress response. Even if this human being is no longer an infant, they are still distressed. And it is incumbent upon us caregivers to proactively, as often as possible, figure out what the kid is distressed about. And the reason the proactive part is possible is because I promise you, there's almost a zero chance that this is the first time this kid has been distressed about their difficulty meeting this expectation. It is probably the 100th time. If we're still dealing with it in the heat of the moment, by restraining the kid, secluding the kid, co-regulating with the kid, giving the kid a break, putting them in a common corner. The list of late interventions is endless. If that's what we're still doing, then we have a very good explanation for why what we've done all this time hasn't worked yet.
I should have not been surprised by reading that kids have died by being suffocated through being restrained and, for using these methods. I was really shocked to hear that.
That probably would be, and the number is 79
Hmm.
over a 26-year period that a study that came out in 2021 documented.
Documented. I'm sure there are some that are not even documented.
Got that right. And that's just in the United States.
Wow.
That's something that I suppose the restraint industry, as we call it, which does $100 million a year in sales, teaching people how to be late. Lateness is apparently a very popular item. Lots of schools are buying it. right? No, not those are data that haven't made their way into the public consciousness. Those are data that need to be in our consciousness. That's tragic.
Yeah, well, so I think what's interesting is there's behaviors and there's behaviors, right? Some concerning behaviors are more tolerable by adults, caregivers, and teachers alike. And so they sort of elicit milder parental reaction. And some are more, they elicit stronger reactions in parents and teachers, right? Like hitting, biting, throwing, kicking, the explosive child elicits. But I think what's important to remember and note, and my work with parents is to always, tap into the empathy and the compassion and the understanding of the parent that it's still the same thing, right? It's the crying and the kicking and the other behaviors. It's just the same thing. We need to offer empathy, support, and guidance and love. But it's hard. It's hard for parents because we didn't receive that from our caregivers. So we don't have the model. We don't believe even that they deserve to be treated kindly in that moment, right? And so a lot has to do with that.
As you know, I divide the world of concerning behaviors into two categories, lucky and unlucky. And those are artificial categories, but they do make the point that lucky frustration responses, whining, pouting, sulking, withdrawing, crying, tend to elicit empathy, nurturance, support from caregivers. And unlucky frustration responses, screaming, swearing, hitting, kidding, kicking, biting, throwing, destroying, running, tends not to elicit empathy, nurturance, and support from caregivers. But they're all frustration responses. No matter whether the concerning behavior is lucky or unlucky, these kids need us to be moving upstream to what unsolved problems were causing those frustration responses so those problems can be solved proactively. Homes where people do that, I mean, the data are clear. This is an evidence-based model, right? In schools that do this, the changes are dramatic.
I would love to conclude this conversation by asking you about expectations. I know we talked a lot about meeting the child where they're at. The problem is because they cannot meet expectations. I want you to dispel some things about expectations. I don't want the people listening saying, "Oh, so we should remove all the expectations." I'm sure people have questions about that, and you've heard all the questions. So what can you say about expectations and making them appropriate for the kids and whatever else is needed to be said about that?
Well, that's the key. It's a concept, we haven't talked about this yet, called expectation management. That's in the new book as well. Expectation management basically means make sure the expectations you're placing on a kid, whether it's your own kid or a student in your classroom, are expectations the kid can actually meet. And get rid of all your motivational explanations for why the kid is having difficulty meeting them. If you put an expectation on a kid that they're having difficulty meeting, you run the risk of causing concerning behavior. And now we're into all of these things that we do to kids with concerning behavior that, number one, really don't work on the concerning behavior, but number two, certainly don't solve whatever problem caused the concerning behavior in the first place. Here's an important thing as it relates to removing all expectations, which I've never said ever in my entire life, right? You're not removing all expectations because there are expectations this kid is currently meeting. You are taking a very close look at the expectations the kid is having difficulty meeting, giving conscious, deliberate thought to whether those expectations are really in range at this point in this kid's development. If you decide that they are in range, you are solving those problems collaboratively and proactively. You're finding out what's making it hard for the kid to meet the expectation, and you're solving it in concert with the kid. If you decide this is out of range, you're going to put that expectation on hold for now until you decide that it is in range. None of what I just said is removing all expectations.
Understood. I think the follow-up question would be, how do I determine if the expectation is too high for my kid?
Judgment call. Totally. There's no simple algorithm for that. That's a judgment call. But I do have a very simple but imperfect algorithm.
Hmm.
If a kid can sometimes meet an expectation, it's in range. If a kid is never meeting an expectation, I think we're probably safe in assuming that it's out of range at this point in this kid's development. Generally speaking, in the kids who aren't okay, we've got quite a few unsolved problems to choose from. I'm not going to miss the ones that we put on hold because we can't work on everything at once, anyways. Work on the ones that you think are in range, table the ones that are not in range. You can get back to them. Saying that it's out of range isn't saying it's out of range forever. It's saying it's out of range for now. Or we got bigger fish to fry. All of that is part of expectation management. We need to stop causing concerning behavior in kids because of expectations they're having difficulty meeting. It's just the wrong way to play it.
Wow, I think this is the best place to end this conversation. I am so grateful for your work, for your revolutionary, transformative work for teachers, educators, parents everywhere. It's been helpful for me in my work, in my parenting. I know for many people. So I really am honored that you are here today.
Thank
And
you.
I hope you continue bringing this work to the world so that it can change in our lifetime.
I won't stop till I drop.
Yeah, yeah. And I love the word hope in the subtitle of the book. And I am hopeful that this will happen soon.
That's where all my energy goes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me on. This was a fun one.
That concludes today's conversation, my dear listener, and I hope you found this episode helpful and inspiring. Be sure to hit that follow button so you don't miss future episodes, and take a moment to leave a rating and review. It really helps others find the show. I would love to hear your thoughts and takeaways. Join the conversation in the Authentic Parenting Facebook group or visit the contact page at authenticparenting.com/contact to get in touch. Authentic Parenting is an ad-free show, and your donations is what makes this podcast possible. Support the show by visiting authenticparenting.com/support or becoming a patron at patreon.com. Your contributions make it possible for me to continue bringing you weekly episodes. And as always, connect to the present moment, to yourself and your children. Until next week, I am Anna Seewald. Thank you so much for listening. This episode was edited and produced by Ami Noor. If you need expert support to bring your dream podcast to life, from editing to full production, Ami Noor can help make it happen. You'll find his link in the show notes.